Hello and welcome to Data Demystified, the podcast where we look beyond the buzzwords to find value in MarTech, AI, and data for marketing. My name is Kevin van Galkeren, I'm CPO at Onmark, and in this episode we're going to talk about something that makes dashboards look great, but doesn't actually tell you how to make better decisions. Vanity metrics. They go up, you feel good, but do they really matter? So let's talk about the difference between looking successful and being effective, and how to shift your focus towards metrics that drive real value for you and for your customer. Vanity metrics are everywhere. They can be page views, they can be impressions, open rates, numbers that look impressive but are often disconnected from actual business outcomes. This might differ per customer, per company, but there's a big chance that even your company has some vanity metrics you're looking into. In small companies, these metrics offer a quick sense of momentum. When resources are tight, time is limited. We want to track eyeballs and engagement, which can feel like real progress. If every penny counts that we're spending on marketing, if we're not that experienced or we don't really know what we're doing yet or who our market is, then just having something to show for after all your work, that can feel very comforting. And I'm not saying that's bad per se, but we also have to ask the question, is this metric actually contributing to something, or is this just a first step? In large organizations, it can get even trickier because teams are often siloed. We've got someone that's responsible for email marketing. There might be people responsible for affiliate sales and some for social media, some for customer success, some for paid search, some for geo in this case. Some people work in sales, customer support. So one person might be judged on the email open rates. Another might be reached on their social media reach. Another on number of leads passed on to sales, even if none of those things actually contribute directly to revenue or customer satisfaction. So we're managing based on a fragmented view of the customer journey, which makes sense because we cannot judge every individual employee on the overall revenue of the company if you're bigger. But at some point, they might turn into vanity metrics. But that's the catch. The moment you start optimizing for a metric, it starts to break down in terms of its value. You might start sending trashy subject lines in your emails to get more opens. They actually don't provide that much value for the customer, or actually diminish the reliability and the authority of your brand. You might boost posts to reach certain reach goals, but then throw away money because it doesn't really lead to sales. None of it moves the needle on what really matters: long-term customer value, sustainable growth, meaningful conversion. So to quote British economist Charles Goodhart, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Which means that once we start to focus on how do we get the number up, the actual impact that number itself makes is diminishing. When we start to optimize for clicks, for those openings from emails, because we just want to try out various different alarming types of headlines, because then people open the email, that open rate is not any more indicative of interest people have in our services or how engaged they are with our brand. They just might be experiencing a fear of missing out. Might be experiencing some kind of sense of alarm because they think they have to read this email, otherwise they might be locked out. That's not the right type of long-term value we're building there. So before we get to the solutions, how we look at actual good metrics that bring impact, first our buzzword breakdown. In every episode, we take a look at a buzzword or a common belief and break it down. So this time, like all episodes, we have a question from a listener.
Are all top of funnel metrics vanity metrics?
Good question. So let's break that down. Top funnel metrics. The answer is not necessarily, I think. Not all top funnel metrics are prone to be a vanity metric. They can become a vanity metric when they're taken out of context. So having reach, that's good on its own, because without a big audience, you cannot get big conversions. So, but once we start to look for reach in suboptimal places, when we stop targeting the entire market, like Byron Sharp, but start targeting a market that's not ours, that becomes an issue. On its own, you have a bigger reach, but in effect, we're not doing anything that's effective. When we optimize that in isolation, so again, in this example, we are optimizing reach without thinking of the longer term consequences or how it contributes to our value for the customer and from the customer, kind of loses its meaning. So it's disconnected from business value. That goes for page views, it goes for reach, it goes for open rates. They can be useful if they're a leading indicator of something, but on its own, they might be misleading as well. If you think about share of search, how much is our market share in that? It's very useful to gauge what your market share is, basically, how aware, how brand aware people are about you, or how aware of your solutions. But if you're being found on things, you're just pushing out there because you want to be found, but you don't really have a differentiated proposition for it, you might be stealing a share of search that doesn't contribute to anything. Right? If you have blogs out there that do very well in search engines, but they don't lead to any conversions, or they're just too off topic for your brand and your imaging, then that's also a vanity metric you're optimizing for. So on its own, top funnel metrics are very useful to gauge the demand, to gauge your market share, to gauge how your growth and the influx of growth is going, what the lagging and leading indicators are. But you have to ask yourself, does this metric correlate with our actual goal, or does it just look good at a dashboard or in my next performance review? So what do we want to measure instead? Because if vanity metrics do not help, what should we be tracking? The answer isn't to stop measuring, of course. I'm not making a plea here to stop being data-driven and just go for whatever makes the most money in a short time. It's to measure with intent. So we have to ask ourselves, what does this metric tell me about my customer? So not so much about the reach I'm having, but am I reaching the right customers? If I have a certain share of search, are they searching for the right things? If I have a certain engagement on this post on social media, is that because they are interested in the content I'm providing, or because I'm just making alarmist content that people engage with for some kind of reason that doesn't really help my brand or my sales? Even better, to go beyond what does it tell me about my customer, what does it help me to do differently? So once we understand what the customer needs from us, how we engage with them, how they find us, what does it help me then to do differently? How can I make a change, make the numbers go up that means something to me and not just look good? Instead of chasing likes, look at what actions signal genuine interest. Which content leads to deeper site visits? So if we land on a blog, how do they move into the funnels that we've provided for them? How does a blog maybe build recognition from our brand and the solutions we provide? Do people come back? Are they ranked good? Does it provide a bigger share in Google or another search engine? Which channels drive returning users? Because once people are aware of what we do, they might not be ready to buy willy-nilly on the first try. That's often what we look for. We want to be first time right. But especially in more complicated decisions when purchasing, if we're talking B2B, also, if you have a bigger DMU, that customer journey is not going to be as linear. We've talked about that before in other episodes. If you want to make sure that our customer journey is fully in the picture, which means not just the first time right, but the aspect of returning users, it's good to know how users come in the first time and how they return and what makes them return. So returning visitors on its own could be a good metric. It could be a vanity metric as well. Which behaviors correlate with higher deal values, higher order value? So which behavior is indicative of a higher chance to buy our products that have a bigger margin, that are going to serve us longer, provide a longer term customer value? That's important to know, because then you can get past the feel good numbers and assess which micro interactions actually contribute to movement in the customer journey. So all those metrics, they can tell a good story on its own. The share of search, the reach you have, the likes, the views, they all can be very useful, but only once we connect them to a different stage in the customer journey. How many reach do we need to get to the next step? What is the necessary step to get people to actually comparing products? Do they need more information? Is that blog relevant? So blog reads on its own might not be the most optimal metric, but if we know that a blog is useful, because then customers can make an informed decision before they go to comparing products, or maybe vice versa, people compare products, find themselves lost in the options, then look for the blog. That's important to know, and then those views for the blog make sense. If you're a content marketer just trying to prove your worth, the views on their own don't tell the entire story. Then they have a risk of becoming vanity metrics. So once we know what the micro interactions are that contribute to this and which don't, we can start optimizing. Optimize for attention, optimizing for momentum. And we shouldn't forget the context here. An engaged session on a landing page might sound great, but if it doesn't lead to a sign up, does it really matter, right? So what does engagement mean? It can probably mean someone spent a lot of time on this page. It can mean they scroll down a lot. And that might be very valid. It might be a shown of interest that people are engaged with your content. It also mean that they may be confused. They cannot find what they're looking for, or they feel like they have to scroll all the way down to find a button to help them to send the next step. They might be confused about what you are. Maybe your campaign, your messaging that got them to this page doesn't align with what they find on this page. So that kind of soft landing, that alignment, cannot be found by just comparing reach and CTR and engaged visitors that lead from it on the homepage itself, because those numbers can tell two different stories. It can tell we have a good CTR leading to a landing page and a lot of engaged users, which might sound very good. It could also mean we have a good CTR because the ad looks well, and then people land on the page, they get very confused and have to spend a lot of time to just look for what are we doing here, and I'm actually where I thought I would end up. With HighGem, you can connect engagement to actual outcomes. You can stop guessing, you can start validating. So, for example, if you have a very good performing ad with a very high CTR but a very low conversion to lead rate, HighGem can show you what people clicked on, how they bounced, how they never come back. So what happens between that good click-through rate and the low sign-up rate. If another ad has a lower CTR, but more repeat visitors, more page depth, stronger conversion, the last one might be more worthwhile to invest in. But that story that happens in between, what happens between those metrics, which is behavior that leads to a bigger sign-up, what explains why the CTR might be good, but the effect might not be, that's what you can use HighGem for. With better insight, you can stop optimizing for applause and start optimizing for impact. Looking to sound smart at your next social gathering? Here's something you can just casually throw out there at the drinks table. The metric that looks best on a graph is often the one that tells you the least. The one everyone's talking about isn't always the one you should be acting on. Why? Because the most strategic numbers are often boring, quiet. If revenue is stable, maybe stable but growing, cost per lead is stable, retention rates are stable. When those metrics don't spike, they sustain us, they sustain the business, right? So everything that's dynamic, everything that's changing, you have to ask yourself, is that important? And is that maybe cause for a lot of visibility, a lot of attention, but is it actually progress? So some metrics, we'd like them to be stable. And although it's very tempting to start telling a story and start optimizing for something that's very variable to grow your business, it might actually be good to have something that's very stable and does not cause a lot of debating, hypothesizing. So what's the takeaway here? Vanity metrics, first off, they feel good. They give us something to point to, give us something to show if you're talking about what's our worth or the worth of our campaign or our efforts. But without a clear link to the actual value they provide, they're just decoration. So here's what to do instead. We always have to ask what happens after this metric. So once we got the reach, once we've got those clicks, once we've got the share of search, the attention of people, once we've got them to scroll down, what happens next? How does that contribute to the longer term? How does this short-term activity contribute to long-term value? And we have to use tools that let you track behavior over time, not just at the surface, not just that particular metric, but the actual outcome at the finish line. HighGem helps you with that by showing you not just what's happening, but also what's working and what's not working. Thanks for listening. And if you've ever been burned by a great looking stat that turned out meaningless, I'd love to hear the story. And of course, if there's a buzzword you'd like to be broken down or a popular belief you'd like to test, send it in. We might feature it next time. See you then.